All right, so let's start at just what you remember from your childhood. When were you born? What?
I was born November 3rd, 1929, and my mother and dad were 18 years old. They had run off and they had eloped to Boston and gotten married, and I was born about a year and a half later. They were just kids. They met each other working at Breyer Manufacturing. It was a jewelry company in Providence. And my mother, with the excuse that she was going to night school, she was dating my father, because he was a very good-looking Italian. I understand romantic, too. But they were just kids when I was born. I don't think Mother was 18, maybe. I'm not sure. Anyway, so I was born November 3rd.
What do you mean romantic?
He was romantic in that he captivated my mother's attention. I mean, you know, I don't know what I mean by romantic. I mean that, I guess his devil-may-care attitude and stuff attracted my mother enough so that she ran away with him in defiance of her family.
Like a Billy Bigelow.
Kind of, but he was more reputable than Billy Bigelow. He was a hard-working young man, although he never really enjoyed hard work. Anyway, he was born in Providence, Rhode Island on August 2nd. I'm not sure the year. You know the year my father was?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I'm not sure the year. And when he was about 6 years old, his mother and father and family moved back to Italy. So his teenage years were spent in Roccamonfina. My grandfather had a very extensive chestnut grove, and that's how he would live. They'd harvest the chestnuts and
In Italy.
And process them. So he left that behind, and he didn't relish working in an American factory, so he liked that better. So they went back to Italy. And it was a very easy kind of living, because chestnuts, what do? They ripen once a year, and that's when and then they just grow. You leave them alone and they grow. We still saw the chestnut groves when we went. One of the first things that Grandpa's cousin did was he roasted some for us, and they had a little open fireplace, and he shucked them. And I says, that's such hard work to do, because it really ruins your thumbs if you try shucking these chestnuts. He says, oh no, I do this all the time. So the chestnut streets, you can go to Roccamonfina and still see my grandfather's chestnut trees. Of course, they all belong to my cousin now, because my father left there. Technically, they would have all been his, because he was the only son in the family, and that's the law in Italy, that the oldest son inherits the property. But he relinquished his ownership to his sister, and she was delighted at that, because she stayed in Italy. His sister Amelia stayed in Italy and really raised her family on the proceeds of those chestnut trees. So I digress. Now, what did you ask me? You asked me when I was born, right? Well, my mother was very ill. She had, what do they call it when a woman gets all puffy?
Edema.
She had edema.
Oh, in pregnancy?
Yeah.
Toxemia.
That's what it was. She had toxemia. So she was in the hospital. So necessarily, I was a preemie. I was 3 pounds and 4 ounces when I was born.
Wow.
But my mother says that I'm alive to this day because she prayed to St. Anne. And that's how she named me. She named me. My father wanted me to be named Thomasina, because that was his mother's name. And that was the custom in the old country, to name the first female child after your mother-in-law. But she gave me that for a second name. But I dropped it a long time ago and took my mother's maiden name for my middle name. Let's see now, what else? So I survived, I did fine. And then my mother and father reconciled somehow with her mother and father. That's Grandma and Grandpa Thomas.
Why did they need to reconcile?
Because my mother ran off, and she didn't, she didn't go through the procedure that a young woman is supposed to do when she gets married. She's supposed to go to, the guy's supposed to go to the daddy, and they have bands, and they have all that stuff. And then they have this wild wedding where all the relatives come. They didn't have any of that.
She didn't get married in a church.
Yeah, oh yes, she did. She got married in a church in Boston, and my uncle Emilio and his girlfriend were the maid of honor and best man. And they, of course, ended up being my godparents. But anyway.
Why
Your Uncle Emilio, that's a new name for me.
Emilio DiBiasio?
Yeah.
Oh.
He's your uncle? How's he related to you?
He's my father's first cousin. His brother was Bucky DiBiasio.
Okay.
Oh, he never came up before,
I
huh?
don't remember that name. Huh?
Well, as I understand it, the two were very good friends when they came from the old country. They were both Italians and both very, very handsome. So they were popular. So my mother's girlfriend, sheepers, I can't remember her name now. Oh, Angie Regano. So she married Emilio, and my mother married Antonio.
Why did they feel the need to go to Boston and not?
Well, they were running away, and they and Emilio and his wife, what did I say her name was? Angelina Regano were married, and so they went. They because they had friends there.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So his
And they got
parents.
married in a Catholic church. I don't know which one.
Yeah.
My mother doesn't remember either. I asked her; she doesn't remember.
But their parents wouldn't have supported.
No, they didn't. They were ostracized. I don't think my grandmother even saw me till I was 3 years old.
Wow.
Was your father living at Aunt Laudette's house then?
No, they were the family was not happy with any of them. My mother
Where was
said
your father living when he got married?
he was living with my Aunt Laudette.
Yeah, that's what I asked. Okay.
Now, my mother and father had a small tenement, and I'm not sure just where it was, but I remember something that my mother told me that I thought was very sweet. Some of my father's friends brought over chickens so my mother could have chicken soup because she was a new mother. And here they were just kids, most of them just from the old country.
So when they came, how long did they stay in Boston? It was just a one-shot deal?
I think so. I don't know.
Yeah.
My guess is that's the case.
So when they came back, where did they live?
They lived in a small flat on Federal Hill.
Uh-huh.
But where, I don't know. At one point, they were living on Broadway in an apartment just beneath where my Aunt Laudette and Uncle Minuch lived when I was little. Because I remember there being a little dog, and he was the cutest thing. He had a little flat face, one of the Chow Chows maybe. I remember that. And then after that, somehow,
So
they reconciled with my mother, with my grandmother and grandfather, and then they got a tenement over in my grandfather's house.
And that's when you lived on Atwells Avenue?
Yeah, we lived there on the 3rd floor. That's where we were when Doris was born. So-
Did your grandmother ever reconcile herself with Tony? Did she get along with Tony? Your father?
When you say get along, darling, she just tolerated him, that's all.
Okay.
My grandma was never rude to anybody, except if you maligned Italy or Mussolini. She thought Mussolini was great. He was going to restore Italy to its former grandeur. She would sit in my grandfather's store and fight with anybody but I never remember my grandmother being rude to anybody, except then. And that was always very funny. And my grandfather would send her upstairs because she would alienate the customers, That my dear grandma, how I loved her.
What's your first memory of your grandmother?
My first memory of my grandmother? Well, I remember in the wintertime she always wore a hat because she was cold, like Daddy does. And I'm thinking my very first memory. She was just always in the background. She never really took an active part in my growing up. Because I was kind of just left on my own. They'd send me out in the backyard and I'd play with the kids. I'd come in if I needed something, and that was about it. Nobody really tended to me, you know. I never remember anybody caring about me. Never. Never. My mother worked, and my aunt and my grandma were supposed to take care of me. But I never remember them taking care of me.
So you had to take care of yourself?
I don't really know what I did. I don't really what I did. I guess when I came in, I ate, and when I needed the bathroom. Sometimes I had to go to the 3rd floor to go to the bathroom, and I wet my pants going up the stairs. I can remember doing that. But it was awful, so I don't really like to think about
What
that.
do you mean awful? How is it awful?
When I think back, I didn't think it was awful because I thought that was the way things were. You know, but when I think back how neglected I was, it makes me feel bad.
Were your mother and father...
Working. They were both working.
Uh-huh.
And so they depended on my grandmother and my aunt, Ada, to take care of me. And they didn't. They didn't.
Was your father working the railroad back then?
Oh, no. No, my father didn't get to work on the railroad for many years. No, I must have been 12, 13, maybe 14 when my father went to work for the railroad. Up to that time, he went from job to job looking for work. At one time, he worked in the Paragon Mills with my grandfather, because my grandfather was a weaver. That was his trade. That was one of the reasons he took his family to Mapleville when they were little. That's where they lived. My mother grew up there, in Mapleville.
Where's that?
It's in the northern part of the state,
Oh, okay.
and it was a mill town, and my grandfather worked as a weaver there. That was where my crazy Aunt Ada burned all the